Okay, so get this. One of America's top AI companies, a company trusted with the nation's most sensitive secrets, gets completely banned by the US government. I mean, totally blacklisted, treated like they're a foreign enemy. And then, just a few hours later, its biggest rival just swoops right in and signs the exact same deal the other company was destroyed for even asking about. This isn't some kind of hypothetical scenario. This is the real story of a high-stakes power play that has a tech giant squaring off against the Pentagon, and the outcome has left Silicon Valley absolutely reeling. Let's dig in.
Right, so this wasn't just some warning shot. This was a kill shot. That statement from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, it wasn't aimed at a company like Huawei or some foreign adversary. Nope. It was aimed directly at Anthropic, a celebrated American AI company. In one single move, the Pentagon just blacklisted them from the entire defense industry. I mean, that is a stunning, stunning use of political and economic force.
So that's the story we're unpacking here. How did we even get to this point? How does a partnership worth hundreds of millions of dollars just completely collapse into an all-out war between Silicon Valley and DC? And in a plot twist that sounds like something out of a thriller, how did OpenAI manage to walk away from the wreckage with the very deal that Anthropic was practically vaporized for even suggesting? To really understand what happened, we've got to go back to the beginning, back to the moment the ultimatum was handed down.
Our story really kicks off with this massive standoff, a high-stakes negotiation that was, well, about to go very, very wrong. This is the moment where the battle lines were drawn in the sand. First off, let's just set the scene a little bit. Anthropic isn't just some random AI company. Their AI model, Claude, was so good, so trusted, that it was the only major AI cleared to be used on the Pentagon's classified networks. We're talking about the most sensitive data in the entire US government. And there was a contract on the table worth up to $200 million, which would have cemented Anthropic's role as a totally critical national security partner. So on the surface, the core conflict looks pretty simple. The Pentagon, or the Department of War as it's being called a lot in this whole saga, wanted to use Claude for all lawful purposes. Sounds reasonable, right? But Anthropic argued that this phrase was basically a Trojan horse. They insisted on keeping two very specific safety guardrails on their tech because they believed that what's lawful today hasn't even begun to catch up to what AI is actually capable of tomorrow. And that was the fundamental disagreement. And let's be clear, the Pentagon was not in a negotiating mood. Secretary Hegseth delivered this really blunt ultimatum. He told Anthropic's CEO, Dario Amodei, that no company was going to dictate terms to the Pentagon. And he gave them a hard deadline. Get rid of the guardrails by 5:01 p.m. on Friday, February 27th, or you're going to face the full wrath of the U.S. government. The clock was officially ticking. So, with that threat just hanging over them, Anthropic had a massive choice to make. Give in or stand their ground. And that brings us to Act 2, the moment of truth.
And, well, they stood their ground. In a public statement that sent absolute shockwaves through the tech and defense worlds, CEO Dario Amodei announced that Anthropic would not be backing down. Despite the threats of losing the contract, of being blacklisted, of basically financial ruin, he stated very plainly that his company could not, in good conscience, remove their safety checks.
So what were these red lines? What was worth risking literally everything? The first was a ban on using their AI, Claude, for mass domestic surveillance. Amodei's whole point was that AI completely changes the game. It can take all this scattered public data, your browsing history, location data, your social media, and instantly fuse it together into this incredibly detailed profile of your entire life automatically and at a massive scale. He argued this was a direct threat to democratic values and that the phrase all lawful purposes was a huge gray area because our laws just haven't caught up to this terrifying new capability. The second red line was all about autonomous weapons. And Anthropic's position here wasn't just an ethical one, it was technical. Amodei said, look, today's frontier AI models, including our own, are just not reliable enough to be given the power to kill without a human in the loop. They're prone to making things up, hallucinations, and all sorts of unpredictable behavior. Putting an unreliable system in charge of life and death decisions, he argued, would put American soldiers and civilians at an unacceptable risk. It wasn't a forever no, it was a not yet, because the technology just isn't safe enough. A principled refusal, then, met with a furious response. And this takes us to Act 3, where the Trump administration unleashed a swift and frankly devastating campaign of retaliation. And this all happened so fast. I mean, just look at this timeline. Friday morning, Anthropic says no. By that afternoon,
And this is key. Before the Pentagon's deadline had even passed, President Trump himself posts a directive on Truth Social. The deadline officially expires at 5:01 p.m. And by that evening, the final hammer falls. The speed here was clearly meant to send a very loud message.
The government's attack came in two parts, a real 1-2 punch designed to cripple the company. First, you have a direct order from the president, banning the entire federal government from using their tech. And second, a formal designation from the Pentagon that was somehow even more severe, poisoning their relationships with the entire private sector defense industry. In his Truth Social post, President Trump did not mince words. He called Anthropic left-wing nut jobs, and he directed every single federal agency to immediately stop using their technology. He gave them a 6-month phase-out period, but the message couldn't have been clearer. Anthropic was now being treated as an enemy of the state.
But this next step, this was the truly shocking one. Secretary Hegseth officially designated Anthropic a supply chain risk to national security. This is an extreme move. It's a weapon that's usually reserved for companies like Huawei, foreign firms suspected of spying. It meant that any company that wanted a military contract, from Boeing to Palantir to AWS, was now legally forbidden from doing business with Anthropic. They were treating a San Francisco startup like a hostile foreign power. It's just wild. So Anthropic is in exile. They're cast out, and they've been made an example of. Now, while some people in the industry, including OpenAI's CEO Sam Altman, publicly expressed some sympathy, that sympathy apparently had its limits. Because this is where the story gets really, really bizarre. Let's move to our final act, the OpenAI deal. So as the dust is still settling from Anthropic's public execution, this post pops up from OpenAI CEO Sam Altman. And notice, he also uses that phrase, Department of War. He says, "Tonight, we reached an agreement. We were encouraged by their deep respect for our safety principles." Wait, what? Deep respect for safety principles? This was the same department that just hours earlier had declared another company a national security threat for having safety principles. The whiplash was immediate. And the claims just got even more stunning. Altman went on to say that the government had agreed to OpenAI's safety principles that he says prohibited mass domestic surveillance and fully autonomous weapons, the very same two red lines that got Anthropic banned. And Altman claimed this wasn't just some handshake deal. He said they were written directly into the final contract and backed by technical safeguards like deploying dedicated field engineers and keeping the models strictly on secure cloud networks. So this is it. This is the multi-billion-dollar question. How is this even possible? Why would the Pentagon launch a public war against one American company for demanding safeguards, only to turn right around and quietly give those exact same safeguards to its biggest rival? What could have possibly changed in just a few hours? I mean, this table just lays it all out, and the contrast is absolutely staggering. On the left, you have the requests. In the middle, you have the consequences for Anthropic. They're branded a national security threat. And then on the right, you have OpenAI's claimed outcome, a government contract. It's the same input, but two completely diametrically opposed outputs. It doesn't make any sense.
The immediate reaction in Silicon Valley was that this was a brilliant, if maybe a little ruthless, corporate power play. The thinking was that Sam Altman had seen his rival stumble and just swooped in, not only snatching the massive contract, but also positioning OpenAI as the reasonable, patriotic partner to the Department of War. It left Anthropic completely isolated. But was it really just a simple corporate victory?
Let's dig into the nuance here, because this might be where the real story is hiding. Remember that phrase, all lawful purposes. Anthropic's whole point was that lawful is dangerously vague when AI can do things the law never even imagined. It seems like OpenAI, on the other hand, was perfectly willing to accept the government's current definition of lawful. So the question is, did OpenAI actually get the same protections, or did they just accept weaker language that gave the Pentagon all sorts of loopholes? In other words, did they agree to a safety policy that basically has no teeth, allowing the government to interpret lawful however it wants down the road?
So this all leaves us with some huge unanswered questions. Was this just the Pentagon punishing a company whose leadership it didn't like and rewarding one that was friendlier? It's no secret the relationship between Silicon Valley and the Trump administration was tense. Or was OpenAI's deal a genuine victory for AI safety? Or did they just sign a piece of paper that the government could ignore whenever it wants? And finally, you have Altman's public call to offer these same terms to all AI companies. Is that a real peace offering or just a clever PR move to make himself look like an industry statesman after a brutal corporate takedown?
So the huge question that's left is this.
What really happened in that room between OpenAI and the Pentagon? Did we just see a major win for responsible AI development, where a company successfully negotiated for critical safety guardrails? Or did we just watch a masterclass in corporate PR, where the word safety was used as a branding tool to win one of the biggest contracts in tech, while a competitor was publicly crucified? That is the question at the heart of this entire saga. Let us know what you think down in the comments.